Hi, I'm Scott Wright, CEO of ClickArmor, which is an innovative gamified learning environment that helps employees and individuals learn defensive skills to reduce their cybersecurity risks. We'll tell you more about ClickArmor later on. In every episode of Can I Be Phished, we spend time going through a potential phishing email and looking at different elements of it that can help you determine whether it's safe or suspicious. We look at the gut feel garbage check, the sender sanity, the link elusiveness, and the body believability. In this episode of Can I Be Phished, I'll be speaking with special guest Shawn Tuma of Spencer Fane law firm. And Shawn has some great insights into some of the risks that we hear about but don't necessarily see what happens, and that is things like ransomware. So it's going to be an exciting episode. Shawn will help us go through an email that looks kind of like your typical Nigerian prince email, but in a very different appearance. So it'll be interesting to get his views and hopefully explain to you some of the things you can look for in this kind of email. So without further delay, let's get into episode number 3 of Can I Be Phished? Okay, I'm here with Shawn Tuma from Spencer Fane. Did I get that right, Shawn?
You got it right.
Excellent. Excellent. I actually haven't met Shawn before. We just sort of connected recently online, and I was intrigued by his exposure or his visibility on topics around cybersecurity, especially when it comes from the legal industry and legal aspects of cybersecurity. So I'm really happy to have you join us today, Shawn.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
Excellent. So maybe you could start by just telling us a little bit about your title, your role, and the firm that you're in.
Sure. My name is Shawn Tuma, and I am a cybersecurity and data privacy attorney. I am co-chair of the Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Group at Spencer Fane, which is a law firm that is throughout the United States generally. We do a significant amount of international work, but our footprint is within the United States in multiple states, kind of starting in the heartland and branching out, if you will, not quite reaching the coasts, unless you consider Tampa Bay a coast, but it's not the coast, right? So, exactly. And in today's world, it doesn't really matter where you are geographically, right?
Exactly.
Because
Yeah.
it's all online. But I'm in Texas. I'm in our Plano, Texas office.
Okay.
And, my practice is 100% devoted to cyber and privacy work.
Excellent.
And I've been working in this space since 1999 when I got into it with Y2K. And it's kind of blossomed and adapted quite a bit ever since. And today, most of the work I do is focused on incident response and data breaches and regulatory investigations, things of that nature. And then we have others in our practice that focus on the compliance part, CCPA, GDPR, those kind of things, and have a really great team. Great team of support.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at your site. You've got a very full range of legal services across the whole organization. So that's great. So I'm sure you get to see lots of examples of interesting situations that are worth discussing, of course, with confidentiality in mind. And we don't want to make anybody uncomfortable, but I think just having the insights and the ability to talk about things that have happened, that can happen to any business, and to give people a little feeling of where I come from with this podcast. We're just trying to really educate people who have an interest in cybersecurity in general. Phishing is sort of the core thing that I'm focusing on with this podcast, but it really goes way beyond that with respect to the phishing is really sort of the tip of the iceberg from my point of view. It touches almost every kind of risk and attack these days. So I think anything is fair game, and I'd really love to hear what Shawn has to say as we get through the program. So one of the things I do typically in this show is look at a particular phishing email that has been brought to my attention or that I've received. And I actually have an email address set up, phishing@clickarmor.ca, where I know I'm inviting a little bit of trouble here, but anybody can forward me messages to that email address, and I'll consider having a look at it to see if we can include it in the show. One thing I've discovered is that just forwarding an email to me doesn't give me as much information about the email as if you were actually to save it in its native form. So it's always better if you can, when you open that phishing email, save it as a .eml or .msg file, and then in its raw form, and then just send it to me as an attachment. That way I don't get all the headers mixed in. So that makes it a little bit easier for me to analyze. This message we're going to look at today, I'm just going to bring it up now, and bear with me. We will jump into this. It's a message from the World Health Organization. Now, you can probably imagine why I'm focusing on this kind of a message these days. I'm sure many of us have seen or heard of lots of scams involving the World Health Organization, the CDC, anything related to the pandemic, in any peripheral way these days is starting to become fair game for attackers. They will try to leverage anything they can, right? So I was looking at this one. It's not a typical phishing message, and I should be fair to the people who listen on an audio podcast. I try to sort of describe what we're looking at, and they won't be missing too much on the link side because there are no phishing links in this message. But I have a little bit of a process that I go through. It's sort of 4 steps. First is the gut feel garbage check, I call it, and it's just you can look at it and say, does this look even worth looking at? And it's neatly formatted, and it's not too hokey to start with, so I'm not going to discount it right away. And so that brings us then to looking at the sender sanity, or the sender information. And in this particular message, it's from the W.H.O with no dot after the O. So there's a little clue there in the sender information. The abbreviation isn't really consistent. They put periods after the W and the H, but not after the O. So a little bit of a tip off there. But what's interesting is if you click on the name, the sender name, which I tell people it's okay to click on the sender information, as long as you don't click on links in the body of the email. You can look at the sender information and find out something about the domain that it was sent from. It's not always guaranteed to be helpful, but sometimes you can easily discount things if they look odd. What's interesting in this one is it's from info@who.int or who.int. And before I opened this or analyzed it, I went to the WHO's website and tried to find out what they were saying about possible scams on their own reputation. And they did say that it is possible for scammers to spoof their domain at who.int. And so that's what's happening here, right? So it's sometimes possible for your business's email servers to detect if somebody is spoofing an email address, but it's not always reliable. So in this case, I would say there's not a lot of information here to tell us that it's a bad email, other than the sort of poorly written sender name itself. But that's really just how I would look at the sender email address. Any thoughts or comments on that, Shawn?
No, I would just say that it's not uncommon for us to see cases like this, especially in business email compromise cases, where they are spoofing those domains like that. And and one of the things we also see is when that happens, there's oftentimes an account that's been compromised on one end or the other on those business email compromise cases.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
They're usually a Microsoft Office 365 account,
Yeah.
and 99 times out of 100, it's not going to have multi-factor authentication enabled.
Yes.
Because if it has MFA on it, they're not usually able to access those accounts. So coming back to the basics that you're talking about, something as simple as having multi-factor authentication on an Office 365 account or a Gmail account or something like that
Hmm.
can really provide a lot of protection in these cases.
Excellent, excellent point. Yeah, and in fact, one of my first guests on the podcast, he was a managed service provider dealing with, many small businesses, and he said one of the number one recommendations for avoiding scams is to have that multi-factor authentication, just to make sure that people aren't getting their email accounts compromised and then used for malicious purposes.
That's right.
Yeah, great. So the sender information is a little interesting, but not terrible in this one. Um, and then that takes me to the next one, which is usually the link elusiveness test. And in this case, there's no link. There's not even an attachment. So what this tells me is we're really being targeted here for, as Shawn mentioned, something called business email compromise, or really a social engineering scam to try and get you to do something. It's not quite yet obvious if you're just looking at one of these for the first time, what they might be able to gain from this, because they're offering to give you some money. Why? How could that be dangerous to you, Shawn?
Well, look, the first thing that I would caution about this email is something that I always, it's the Nigerian prince. It's in a different form, and that is,
Mhm.
if it seems too good to be true, it is.
It is,
You
yeah.
know, and if someone's offering to just out of the blue email you and tell you you can get your $2.5 million, that's a good enough reason to delete right there. But what they're trying to do here is they're trying to build a dialogue with you. They're trying to start getting your sensitive information by responding to this, by having that dialogue where they then fish you in, if you will, you know, bit by bit by bit.
Yep.
And you have to understand the way these attackers work is they know how to do a lot of due diligence on you. So if you respond to this, like let's say with your business email, and email them back, they're going to now be able to go look up who you are. They're going to be able to look up your LinkedIn most of the time. They're going to probably find your Facebook. They're going to find everything else. And they're going to build a model of you where they know more about you than you probably realize. And they're going to use all that information against you subtly to help pull you in.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, this could be just the starting point. We used to see this as well, it is definitely the starting point, but we used to see it as the beginning of a predictable scam where, they tell you, oh yeah, you can get the money, but first you've got to pay a deposit or something, right? And
Yeah.
as soon as they get you to pay something that sounds legitimate or plausible, then they'll keep coming back to you to get as much or money from you as possible, right?
Yeah, I mean, once you've invested a little something into it, now it's incrementalism at
Yeah,
work.
yeah,
It's, well, I've already given them $100. I need to take this chance to see if I can get some money back now.
yeah.
And then you put a little more and then a little more. And one thing we're seeing a lot of, speaking of that incrementalism, is through text messages, through um, people sending, usually to males, nude female pictures, saying, send me a picture back of yourself,
Right.
people doing it. And then once they have a picture of you from your phone with your number, in your home or wherever,
Yeah.
they now use it to extort
Yeah. Yeah.
and say either pay this or send me Apple gift cards, or else I'm going to go post this online.
Yeah. There are just so many possibilities. It's just
Yeah.
incredible. But I mean, even now, it's a process that I think has evolved into something I call softening up. Right. It is that building rapport, building some trust, um, stringing you along a little bit, so that there was nothing dangerous in that first one or two email exchanges, so you kind of tend to trust the person, and then they'll
Yeah.
send you a link or an attachment that is weaponized in some way and is dangerous, or they may continue on. Like I said, there's just so many ways they can exploit you once you have responded in any way, and they can start learning things about you.
Yeah, and that's why you don't respond.
Yeah,
You may recognize it, and some people think they're going to be cute and respond, but every communication you have with them is giving them a little bit more information about you,
yeah.
and you just don't respond.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So there are a couple of things that I looked at in the content of this message. I mean, mostly it's, it looks like official worded letter saying, here's how you get your $2.5 million grant, right? But the phone numbers, I did a bit of research. These phone numbers, if you do a Google search on them, they come up with scams all over the place. And then I went to the World Health Organization website, looked for their phone number, and in fact, their phone number, their headquarters is in Zurich or someplace in Europe, I believe, and their only U.S. office is actually in Washington D.C., not New York, according to their website. So you do a little bit of research on them if you're not sure. I mean, for $2.5 million, I do a bit of research right before I go for this. I did say that there were no links, but there actually is an email link down near the bottom. And what's interesting is it's World Health Organization 20 at citromail.hu. So there's a big red flag. It's not at who.int, which is the official domain. I guess they couldn't get the insider to have that much access that they could pick up their mail inside the Who server. But this makes it easy for them to get an email from you. But it doesn't resemble in any way really a legitimate email address. So those are the key things that we would look for, and there's a lot of official looking stuff. I'm sure it would go over a lot of people's heads. They'd say, well, this kind of looks official. So but as Shawn said, just don't reply to these things that look like it's too good to be true, right? If you don't
Yeah,
get
and
money for nothing.
you really don't. I mean, you have to use your common sense a little bit and realize anyone can send anything over the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, when you see it coming from one email address and then saying respond to another,
Right.
that's a red flag. Um, when you see an entity name in the first, part of the email address, not the domain,
Yeah.
that's a red flag. We see a lot of, World Health Organization 20 type things at
Yep.
gmail.com or
Yeah.
at Proton Mail or at AOL or Yahoo or whatever.
Yeah.
When you see those kind of things, you got to know that's any legitimate organization that's throwing around millions of dollars, they're going to have their own domain.
Exactly. Well, I think that pretty much covers the major points in this email that would tip you off for it being suspicious. So thanks a lot, Shawn, for your help on analyzing that. I'm going to just switch back to our normal mode of display and have a little bit of a chat with Shawn now about what he's doing, what kinds of things he's interested in, and maybe some of the news in your industry. If you're like most managers, you're increasingly concerned about employees being targeted with phishing and social engineering attacks that can be very costly. You may have noticed that some static security awareness training programs or phishing assessments just aren't very effective at changing employee behavior. What employees need is a more dynamic and engaging experience that uses proven techniques for accelerating knowledge retention. ClickArmor delivers a better way to engage employees, one that allows them to actually develop and practice real defensive skills in a safe and fun environment. Our gamified phishing and social engineering awareness modules use dynamic learning challenges and simulations to efficiently teach basic skills like analyzing email sender information, links, and body content, or learning how to avoid giving information or access to the wrong person. Employees can practice decision-making for risky scenarios in a safe environment and then get immediate feedback and earn points as they compete against their peers. ClickArmor also provides you, the manager, with risk data you've never had before in the form of an employee cyber vulnerability profile. Our flexible, dynamic platform allows for tailoring of any content to your terminology and environment, with monthly challenges available to maintain program momentum. You can try ClickArmor's gamified phishing, social engineering, and working from home modules at no cost. You can also have your own free trial organization to see what administrators can do to manage users and content and generate reports. So start your free trial today at clickarmor.ca. What would be sort of your number one topic these days to be talking about?
You know, my number one topic right now is cyber insurance, because we've reached a point, and we handle so many ransomware cases. You know that I know it's people, that's a hot button issue for people. They're you know, oh, I'd never negotiate, I'd never pay, whatever. That's easy to say until you're faced with that or going out of business,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And what we're seeing is companies are, even those that are doing a pretty good job, are still getting hit. We're seeing companies, in healthcare practices especially, that are hiring managed service providers
Right.
that seem to be doing a pretty good job, and they're still getting hit. We're
Really.
seeing managed service providers getting attacked and their tools being used to hit
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
of their customers,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
right?
crazy.
And it's not because they weren't doing a decent job. They were doing a decent job,
Yep.
maybe even a really good job. It's just the hackers have become so sophisticated and so good at what they do,
Yep.
and the odds, they only need one lucky shot.
Yep.
Security has to get it right 100% of the time. So when you look at that and you look at the catastrophic consequences now of a business literally getting shut down between the time you go to bed at night and the time you wake up in the morning, and having all operations shut down,
Mm-hmm.
that's catastrophic. And so it's no longer just about security and defense, it's about resilience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do you become more resilient? Well, you've got to have the ability to be able to respond in those situations. Cyber insurance is something I view as being critical for responding for certainly small to mid-sized business, but really all business, because we don't work for free. The vendors we need to come in and do this work don't work for free.
Right.
And, you know, the ransom demands are going up exponentially. And the hackers know, that because they get in and the first thing they do is they encrypt the backups.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they know what you had, and they know they've now eliminated that.
Mm-hmm.
And they know you don't have a choice. And so you've got to have that ability to be able to respond. That's where cyber insurance steps in.
Mm-hmm.
And the most important thing to know there is, if you don't know you have cyber insurance, you don't have it.
Good
Okay.
point. Good point.
Number two, if you don't know that you can use the professional providers that you want to work with, you probably can't use them, because cyber insurance companies have their own preferred panels
Mm-hmm.
of people like me who work for certain carriers, or
Yeah.
you know, are on their approved list for, you know, your forensics providers, your decryption providers. And if you don't specifically request the ones you
Yeah.
know and want to work with, you may not be able to use them. So you need
Yeah.
to know, before you get into that desperate situation, who are you allowed to use, who has been approved, who are the providers, and you need to have a relationship with them, because when you get hit with ransomware, is no time to be saying, oh,
Yeah.
who can I call for legal counsel, oh, who can I call to help us get this undone,
Yeah.
because you may
And
only have hours.
yeah, and there could be I mean, it's obviously going to be getting busier, right, for the forensics guys and the legal teams like yourselves. So probably does help to have at least shopped around and know your options before you can even, you know, sort of
Yeah.
sleep at night.
That's right, and that's all part of that incident response planning is knowing what coverage do you have, and under that policy, who are your relationships that you're going to use, and
Yeah.
getting those written out ahead of time, having the contact information, who do I call when I need them, because that's the most important step of getting an incident response going, is
Mhm.
getting your team in place and getting them on the field playing.
Yeah, I have a question for you. So, one of the things that I noted, a year ago, I guess we started to see sort of what I call double dipping, right? So the people who or the ransomware attacker, they steal or they lock up the data, and if you decide, well, I've got good enough backups, I'm not going to pay, then they come back again and say, well, you know what? When I locked up your data, I also made a copy of it, and I'm going to dox it somewhere on a public forum. So I think you should pay me anyway.
Yeah, yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, look, these threat actors are very smart. They know what they're doing, and they're doing, they're experts at this. And it's like any other ransom or extortion type situation. The more angles I can get over you, the stronger my bargaining position is, and the more incentivized you are to pay.
Yeah,
And so we're seeing certainly more of that. It started, um, like you said, about a year ago. We really saw it pick up in the fall of last year,
right.
and it's only continued to grow with these new groups out there that realize, okay, so people, it's like, what led to the rise of ransomware was inappropriate backups.
Yep.
The best way to defeat a ransomware was to have good backups. So the hackers learned that, and they said, well, the first thing we'll do then is we'll go in and encrypt your backups. Then you're
Hmm.
left without an option. Now, companies are getting wiser. They're not having backups on their mapped drives.
Yeah,
They're having
offline or
offline
yeah, yeah,
backups, redundancies of that. And so the hackers are like, okay, fine. If you're going to do that, then we're going to figure out another way so we can keep making money. And that's what
yeah,
it's all
yeah.
about for them.
It actually goes way back to the first wave of major security breaches, privacy breaches, when I'm sure that it was legal advice to most businesses to say there is no evidence that this information has been abused in any way, and you'd hear the exact same terminology from every data breach notification, right? And I'm going, there's no way they could know that, but they have to kind of protect themselves and say, if we had any knowledge of that, we'd have to disclose it, right? So
Well, and we spend a lot of time on how we craft those notices, because we certainly don't want to be inaccurate or misleading,
mhm.
but we do use a great deal of caution in making sure we're very precise in what we do say. And
So
so we may not say there is no evidence. We may say we are not aware of any evidence of
right,
misuse or of
right,
fraud being committed with this,
yeah,
but we do work very carefully to ensure that it's accurate, um, not misleading, but also that we are not unnecessarily alarming people, because in most of these attacks, we're not seeing that misuse. We're
mhm,
providing the credit products so that
yeah.
they have a vehicle, and
Uh,
and and it's not getting misused oftentimes, certainly in these ransomware cases.
Yeah, it is interesting because one of the first things I thought of is if they had access to your data to encrypt it, then they had access to steal it, and it's pretty thin argument to say that that it's not likely to be abused, but it's more likely to be abused for extortion
Well, and
than for actually monetizing the data itself.
yeah, and the other thing is, what we've also seen over the last couple of years is a rise in what we would call ransomware as a service.
Yeah,
And so it's a distribution model where you have the real sophisticated attackers who have created this malware and are the brains behind it. And then you have the distribution network, which can be, your script kiddies, your kids in mom's basement,
yeah,
whatever, subscribing to the service and just using very rudimentary tactics. Um, they often don't have either the time in the network or the capability of retaining all of that data to be able, because they're hitting multiple targets. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a volume business. The more you can hit, the more quickly you can hit, the more money you're going to make.
Sooner you can
If you
retire.
take,
Yeah.
yeah, if you're taking too much time on any one particular client or a target, you're going to be losing a lot of your valuable time.
Excellent.
And so it's kind of quick hits in a lot of these cases where they realize they're going to make more money off of hitting 100 people
Yeah.
with this than hitting, say, 5, where they go in, they take the time to get the data to exfiltrate, which takes quite a bit of time many times,
Yeah.
and also increases the likelihood that they're going to get caught.
Yeah. So that raises the question then. So now that we have this sort of double dipping thing happening as a threat for extortion, have you seen it actually carried through where
Oh
if
yeah.
organizations don't pay, then the information does get publicized?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're seeing them carry through with that many times
Good.
when they
Okay.
make that
Well,
threat.
good.
Um, that's all the more reason why we have to have really good forensics providers who are accustomed to working with
Hmm.
these cases in particular, because many times they are able to look at some of the traits of these attackers and say, we know what this gang does, we know what this gang doesn't do.
Right.
um, and they're able to look at the environment and see how long were they in the environment. Did they have enough time to go in and
Yeah.
actually exfiltrate
That's
that
yeah.
data?
That's a good idea to
Now,
evaluate the risks, right?
yeah,
For yeah.
and it gives us some guidance at the beginning, because
Mhm.
there are times when they say, look, we've taken a peek, we can see what they did, they took the data, move immediately to your notification so you
Yeah.
can put
Yeah.
people on notice of this. But what happens far too many times is you have the air quotes IT guy come in who led to this. And I don't mean your professional IT providers who work hard and do a good job and stay abreast of the threats, and they take their job seriously. I mean, the friend of a cousin of a brother-in-law who, if you let him do it on a weekend, will do it for a 6-pack of beer and,
Yep.
handle your IT for you like that. Well, they panic
Yeah.
because they thought they had backups. They don't. You know, they thought they had done a good job. They didn't. And now they panic. And so the first thing they want to do is wipe the server and try to reload.
Yeah.
Well, when they wipe that server, you lose all that forensic data many
Yeah.
times, and you're not able to do that. Or what's worse is you do have cyber insurance. They are willing to negotiate and pay that ransom. But oh, by the way, the IT guy just wiped the whole database now, and there's nothing to decrypt when you get the keys.
Yeah.
So you had the patient laying there on the gurney. They came in with the machete and chopped their head off, because they thought they were doing the right thing, but they didn't have a clue what they were doing. That's
Wow.
why you've got to be able to get true professionals in there
Yeah.
the day you know of it, and get them and their advice to start guiding that process.
That's great, great insights. I appreciate that. So, if you wanted to actually talk a little bit about, what the process looks like for shopping for cyber insurance and getting it, and how do you evaluate it and put it in place?
It's interesting because the next rule I would say about cyber insurance is, if you don't know you have the right cyber insurance for your business, you probably don't.
Yeah.
And so then the question is, well, how do I know it's the right insurance? And well, at first you have to know your risks, because all insurance is a risk management device. It's
Yep.
a risk transfer device. You have to know your risks. So you have to start with your own risk assessment of yourself.
Hmm.
What are your greatest strengths? What are your greatest weaknesses? What type of data you have? Where is it stored? How is it stored? How is it accessed? Who has access to it? All of those kind of things are important. Are you consumer facing? Are you B2B? All of those things are important to know,
Yep.
because several things about cyber insurance policies that people may not realize is a lot of them, not so much anymore, but many still do, have social engineering exclusions. Well, as we know, phishing is one of, if not the greatest cause or entry points for even the most sophisticated cyber attacks.
Yep.
If you have a social engineering exclusion in your policy, you may be excluded from all your coverage based upon that. You've got to look at that policy and see.
Yeah.
If you're a business to business organization where your primary risk lies not necessarily in to consumer data, but to business partner data, you've got to make sure you don't have an exclusion for contractual liability. Where your obligations arise by virtue of your MSA or your privacy policy with someone else, not necessarily through the legal obligations of notification laws, things like that. So there are a lot of different points you have to look at and understand. And really, most of the times, you're going to need a good broker that truly understands cyber insurance,
Hmm.
who can help you get the right policy and make sure it's meeting your needs. But you have to understand yourself. You
Yeah.
have to understand your business risks before you can make sure
Yeah.
that I mean, so if you deal in payment card data, do you have PCI coverage, to cover that kind of risk, because that can be very large.
Hmm.
If not, so there's all those things you really have to know about yourself.
Is there a publicly sort of available process for doing a risk assessment that you recommend, or is it more of a proprietary thing?
Um, it's more of a proprietary thing because everybody has their own different ways of evaluating risk.
Hmm.
Um, they're if you want to spend some, I mean, you know, I take it back. There really is a good solution for that. Go to the NIST
Hmm.
framework
Hmm.
and look at NIST guidance.
Which is
It's
the
out
National
there.
Institute of Science and or
And
Standards and Technology. Yeah.
standards and
Yeah. Yeah.
technology, yeah.
Yeah.
And look at what their requirements are and look at what you're doing compared to that. That'll give you a pretty good idea of kind
Hmm.
of where you stand, where your deficiencies are.
I know a little bit about the NIST standards. Is there one in particular you're thinking of, or?
Just well, they've actually recently come out with the privacy,
Mm,
the NIST privacy
okay.
framework or whatever they call it,
Okay.
the NIST cybersecurity framework,
Okay.
and then look at their incident response guidance as
Mm,
well, because that tells you a lot of what you have to do to respond to these. But
yeah.
really, it's not a complicated process
Hmm.
at the first level. At the first level, you're just trying to understand what data do we have. I mean, really, cyber risk is about two things. It's about protecting data and it's about protecting networks.
Right.
And you got to protect the network to protect the data.
Hmm.
And so you got to understand your network and you got to understand your data. And where is it? Who has access to it? How is
Hmm.
it being protected? How sensitive is it? What obligations does it trigger? If you're healthcare, that's one thing. If you're dealing with data of EU residents, that's another. California residents, that's another.
Mm,
Those kind of things that you just got to follow that and you
yeah.
got to map it and you got to understand it, and then you've got to understand what are we doing to protect that as an organization. And the most cost effective means many times are starting with the basics. Do you have policies and procedures that help guide your workforce?
Hmm.
Are you training your workforce? Are you training on phishing? Are you training on email security, passwords, things
Right.
like that? Do you use multi-factor authentication? Do you use appropriate endpoint detection, your firewall, your backups? Do you have backups of your backups stored somewhere in cold storage to
Yeah.
help get you back online? All of those things are really important steps. Um, One we see a lot of is especially during COVID-19
Hmm.
now and the work from home
Yep.
is people using remote desktop access.
Yep.
And they look for the cheapest, easiest solution. They're not protecting that with VPNs. They're not protecting that with multi-factor authentication, and it's leading to a lot of these incidents that we're seeing.
Mm. And those would be decisions likely made by the IT people in the small business or the enterprise, right?
Yeah, that, and then Unfortunately, a lot of times IT is asking for these things, and the business units don't want to pay for it because
Yeah.
of the cost, not understanding that all it takes is one ransomware attack,
Jeez, yeah.
and you're going to wish you would have paid for it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, you're singing my tune, Shawn. It's especially on the security awareness stuff, as you know, it's the thing that I'm pretty passionate about. And
I am as well, because I have children, and I have, in my mind, the most brilliant children in the world. And I expect them to always do right and to get things right, just like I think most businesses expect of their employees and their workforce. But what I also know about my children is if I don't give them some guidelines and if I don't talk to them about it and help them understand it, they're not clairvoyant.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
not just going to pick it up out of nowhere.
And they
You
get it
got
just
to
from their
help
own
teach
perception,
them.
right? So
That's
yeah,
right. You
yeah, yeah.
got to teach people what you expect out of them. And that's why I believe really one of the first lines of defense is education, teaching our workforce what we expect on a basic level, how to protect themselves, therefore how to protect our businesses.
Awesome. That's great. I really appreciate the insights, Shawn. It's been a lot of fun having you. Can you let people know if they'd like to reach you or have questions for you, what the best way to contact you is?
Absolutely. First would be our law firm's website, which is www.spencer, S-P-E-N-S-E-R, F-A-N-E, I'm sorry,
I
S-P-E-N-C-E-R
was going to say, yeah, better be a C.
dot, F-A-N-E.com. My blog, ShawnETuma.com, ShawnETuma.com. I'm on Twitter at Shawn Tuma. I'm on LinkedIn, Shawn Tuma. And, there's just, there's many ways there that you can reach me. And, if you have questions about this stuff or you need a recommendation for some brokers we know and trust or insurance carriers, things like that, give
Mhm.
me a call and let me know, and I'll be happy to help.
Well, that's awesome, and I think we didn't even get to talk about the Texas ransomware incidents that
It's
happened in
bad,
May. So,
bad
yeah,
stuff.
maybe we'll have you back on again soon, and we can. Hopefully, there won't be more to talk about them, but we know there will be
We
lots
know
to
there
talk
will be. Yep, yep.
about. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Shawn. Great to speak with you, and take care.
My pleasure. Thank you, Scott.